Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into something I am absolutely pumped about, the ultimate superhero. We're talking capes, cowls, and decades of absolute global obsession. Yep, we're talking about Batman. Now, you might be wondering, what actually sets him apart from the rest of the comic book heavyweights? Well, it's simple. Underneath that iconic suit, Bruce Wayne has literally zero superpowers. None. Instead, he relies entirely on peak human strength, a razor-sharp intellect, and, a seemingly bottomless bank account to build the absolute greatest crime-fighting arsenal ever devised. He is the ultimate self-made hero.
So that brings us to a really fascinating question. Where exactly does comic book fiction end and real, hard scientific fact begin? Because, let's be honest, it's super easy to watch these movies or read the comics and just dismiss all that high-tech wizardry as pure fantasy. But what if I told you that pretty much all of Batman's craziest tools have a very credible and honestly a deeply fascinating basis in actual science? Seriously, today we're going to unpack the real-world engineering and the physics that make the Dark Knight's arsenal actually possible.
Okay, let's dive right in. Here's our blueprint for the Explainer. We'll start with a hero without superpowers, then go inside the utility belt, look at engineering the Batsuit, check out the aerodynamics of the cape, explore the Batmobile and Batpod, and finally wrap up with fiction-inspiring real science.
All right, Section 1, a hero without superpowers, intellect over genetics.
Because Bruce Wayne totally lacks superhuman gifts, his whole method is basically extreme problem solving. If we trace how his gear evolved, it's pretty wild. Back in 1939, he was using standard lockpicks and glass cutters, everyday stuff. But then, fast forward just 1 year to 1940, and he's already using infrared night vision. Fun fact, that was a technology being actively developed by the US Navy right around that exact same time. Jump to the 1960s, and while most of the world was barely grasping the concept of mainframes, Batman's got these massive computer databases chilling in the Batcave. And by the 90s, he's tapping right into complex law enforcement networks. And the driving force behind all this relentless innovation? His absolute refusal to ever use a gun. He literally had to invent his way out of situations, using wits and science to disable enemies without lethal force.
Moving on to Section 2, inside the utility belt, miniaturizing technology. Now, having amazing gadgets is one thing, right? But trying to carry them all while doing backflips off gargoyles, that's a whole different ballgame. The real-world engineering challenge here is miniaturization, making functional stuff small enough to actually fit on a belt. Look at the 1930s. You had the commercial Minox camera. Sure, it was small enough to hold in one hand, but you still needed two hands to cycle the film. For a spy, or, a caped crusader trying to stay hidden, that's just way too much movement. It draws attention. So intelligence agencies like the CIA stepped in and process improved it. They built these incredible sub-miniature document copy cameras that were easily concealable, fully operable with just one single hand, and could hold twice as much film. This is exactly the kind of real-world clandestine tech that inspired Batman's early evidence-gathering gadgets.
And as we roll into the atomic age of the 1950s, the comic books started getting a little wild. But here's the crazy part. Reality eventually caught up. Take Batman number 109. In it, he uses this seemingly far-fetched heat ray to detonate explosives. Well, guess what? Today that is actual scientific fact. It perfectly mirrors the modern US military's active denial system. This is a non-lethal weapon that shoots high-frequency microwaves over distances up to 550 yards. Basically, it heats up the surface of a target's clothing, acting almost like a giant, intense light bulb, making them unbelievably uncomfortable without causing any actual lethal harm. Talk about comic book fantasy literally becoming modern military reality.
But we got to talk about his most famous gadget, right? The grappling gun. And I want to throw a specific number at you, 5,000 watts. Why does that specific number matter? Because, look, shooting a grappling hook up to a building is the easy part. You can do that with simple compressed air, but rapidly lifting a 200-plus-pound man who is strapped with heavy armor straight up off the ground in a matter of seconds, that requires sheer, massive mechanical power. To put it in perspective, 5,000 watts is roughly 50 times the power of your standard household light bulb, all packed into a handheld, motorized device.
And to see how this brilliantly plays out in the real world, just compare Batman's grappling gun directly to the US Army's Atlas Ascender. The Atlas Ascender is this incredible portable battery-powered winch. It's used for rapid escapes and combat search and rescue. Honestly, it operates a lot like a capstan winch you'd see on a sailboat. You just wrap the rope, pull a variable speed trigger, kind of like holding a heavy-duty power drill, and this thing can rapidly pull a 500-pound load straight up a vertical surface. That is more than enough lifting power to yank a fully loaded soldier, or Batman and whoever he's rescuing, straight up into the shadows.
Okay, Section 3. Engineering the Batsuit, from cloth to armor.
Obviously, as his enemies started packing heavier firepower over the years, Bruce's suit had to evolve. The absolute crucial starting point here is Kevlar. Developed back in 1965 by DuPont, the thing that makes Kevlar feel like magic isn't that it's rigid. Actually, scratch that, it's exactly the opposite. It's a synthetic biweave. So when a bullet hits it, the interweaved fibers actually stretch. The individual threads fight against each other, absorbing all that crazy kinetic energy from a high-speed impact without breaking. When you layer it properly, it gives you 5 times the strength of steel. That's what allows Batman to survive close-range ballistics.
But, for the really heavy firepower, he needs hard plates, specifically ceramic armor, much like the stuff made by Ceratodine. Let's walk through the microengineering on this because it is fascinating. First off, they take boron carbide powder, which is super light. Second, they compress it into molds using induction heating at a mind-boggling 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That bakes it until it's practically as hard as a diamond. Now, step 3, and this is the absolute genius part. When a bullet actually strikes this plate, the ceramic is designed to shatter. That intentional shattering is what dissipates the bullet's deadly energy. And finally, step 4, a resin spoil shield, which is fused right to the back of the plate, catches all those broken diamond-hard shards so they don't tear into the wearer's body. It is literally life-saving physics in action.
And what about fire? Batman is constantly dramatic walking through explosions. Well, enter Nomex. Unlike your standard cotton t-shirt, which would ignite instantly, Nomex is a high-tech, fireproof fiber. It's the same stuff used by actual firefighters and professional race car drivers. When it's exposed to intense heat, it doesn't just melt. Instead, the fibers carbonize and actually thicken up. They create this tough protective barrier right between the suit and the skin. This tech is what ensures our hero can literally stroll through roaring flames for several minutes, feeling nothing more than just the radiant heat. Which brings us to Section 4, Aerodynamics of the Cape, gliding through Gotham.
So, fun fact, humans, much like actual bats in nature, are terribly ungraceful flyers. But if you apply the right physics, we can be excellent gliders. In the more modern iterations, Batman uses this memory cloth that suddenly stiffens into a rigid wing. And the real-world scientific foundation for this? It's called magnetoreological fluids. Yep, it's a mouthful. Basically, these are fluids packed with microscopic magnetic particles. The moment you introduce a magnetic field to them, those particles instantly align, and the fluid becomes incredibly stiff. Now, while current real-world applications are mostly on a microscopic scale, the foundational science absolutely proves that manipulating the rigidity of a fabric using electrical and magnetic currents, it's totally possible.
But to actually glide, we have to look at how real-world wingsuits work. Notice that for Batman to cover any real distance, he's not up there flapping his cape like a bird. He requires a steep drop from a high altitude so that gravity can generate forward speed. The fabric catches the air, creating an airfoil effect that gives him lift. This is exactly how extreme sports wingsuits work today. Air rushes in, fills up the suit, and creates one massive tension-filled wing. But hey, take note of this very real-world caveat. While modern wingsuits allow for some incredible controlled gliding, the users still 100% require a parachute for that final, safe descent to the ground. Batman might skip that part, but we definitely shouldn't.
Moving to Section 5, the Batmobile and Batpod, heavy machinery.
When you are fighting a literal one-man war on crime, you're going to need some serious transportation. Let's look at the aerodynamics of the 21st century Tumbler. Think of it as a mashup between a Lamborghini and a military Humvee. It weighs a massive 5,000 pounds, but it can still hit speeds of 130 miles per hour. So how does it stay on the road without just flying out of control? Well, it uses the exact same airflow principles found in Formula One Grand Prix racing cars. It's got these exterior flaps that act like tiny upside-down airplane wings, actively pushing the vehicle down. At the same time, the undercarriage is designed so that air flows significantly faster underneath the car than over the top of it. That creates a low-pressure zone on the bottom, literally sucking this 5,000-pound tank right to the pavement for supreme stability.
And we can't forget those crazy jumps. The Tumbler is famous for these massive rampless leaps. Here is the wild physics breakdown of how that would actually work. Step 1. The vehicle pulls a slight wheelie just to angle the front end upward. Step 2. It fires a rear jet engine, giving it extreme rapid forward thrust.
Step 3. That specific combination of the upward angle and the jet thrust launches it straight into the air. No ramp required. But as any engineer will quickly point out, the real danger isn't the jump itself, it's the landing. That is why Step 4 is so absolutely critical. It lands on heavily extended front wheels that utilize massive electromagnetic shock absorbers. These slow the deceleration down over a much longer distance, stopping the vehicle and, more importantly, the driver from being completely crushed upon impact.
And then, born directly from the tumbler, we get the Batpod. This 700-pound mechanical beast is just a feat of extreme engineering. First off, notice the riders in a prone, belly-down position. That isn't just to look cool, it massively lowers the center of gravity and pretty much eliminates aerodynamic drag. It's exactly like professional Grand Prix motorcycle racers ducking down on a straightaway. Second, because those tires are so incredibly massive, you literally cannot steer it with just your wrists. So it has these arm shields that force the rider to steer by shifting their entire body weight. And finally, take a look at where the engine isn't. It's not sitting in the middle of the bike. It uses cutting-edge, independent wheel drive technology. There's actually a computer-synchronized, high-horsepower engine tucked inside the hub of both the front and rear tires, providing the ultimate in traction and control.
And our final section, number 6, fiction inspiring real science, the seamless loop. So, we've seen how real science builds Batman's world, but it's super important to recognize the cultural cross-pollination happening here too. Comic industry veteran Paul Levitz hit the nail on the head when he said, "It's a seamless loop. The changes in the real world inspire the writers, and the writers and the artists, in turn, inspire the scientists and the engineers to dream." I love that. It perfectly captures why all this matters. The kids who grow up reading these comics or watching these films, they become the inventors, the defense contractors, and the visionary designers of tomorrow. These comic book gadgets act as actual blueprints that challenge real-world engineers to figure out how to make the impossible completely possible.
And honestly, this all works so well because of who the character is at his very core. Director Christopher Nolan summarized it perfectly. He said he embodies that fantasy of a man who, through sheer self-discipline, turned himself into a heroic figure. That's it, right there. The true magic of this character is his humanity. You don't have to be born on an alien planet to be him. You just have to push your own physical and mental abilities to their absolute peak. It grounds the mythology and makes the science and the heroism wonderfully accessible to all of us.
So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. As our own real-world technology races forward at this unprecedented pace, which of today's comic book fantasies are going to become tomorrow's scientific facts? I mean, we've already seen memory cloth, microwave heat rays, and independent wheel drives inching their way out of the comic pages and right into modern laboratories. The science of the Dark Knight is real, and it is evolving every single day. So keep your eyes on the horizon, folks, because the impossible is usually just an engineering problem waiting to be solved. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I'll catch you next time.